The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. I was sitting in my small office at the accounting firm where I had worked for the past 8 years when my cell phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. Mr. Harrison, my mother's attorney. Mom had passed away just 3 weeks earlier, and the grief still sat heavy in my chest like a stone I could not swallow. I answered, expecting routine paperwork discussions, but something in his voice made me pause. There was a weight there, a careful tone that suggested this conversation mattered more than I understood. He said we needed to meet about the will, that there were important matters to discuss. When I hung up and drove home that evening, my wife Lauren asked about the call. I told her it was just estate stuff, nothing major. But her eyes lit up in a way that made my skin prickle. She asked when the meeting was, how soon we would know about the inheritance. I brushed it off, but that night I could not sleep. I had no idea that phone call would reveal the two biggest truths of my life: how much my mother loved me and how little my wife did. Before I tell you what happened next, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want to hear how this all played out. Trust me, you will not believe what my mom had planned. This story gets intense, and you are going to want to stick around to see how everything unfolds. My mother's name was Dorothy. She was the kind of woman who never sat still, never complained, and never asked for help even when she desperately needed it. She had built her life from nothing, which is not an exaggeration. After my father died when I was 10 years old, Mom raised me alone in Portland, Oregon. She worked 2 jobs at first, then eventually saved enough to buy a small laundromat on the east side of town. That single laundromat became 2, then 3. Over the course of 20 years, I watched her wake up at 5 in the morning and come home after dark, her hands raw from sorting clothes and fixing machines. She never bought anything fancy for herself. She drove the same Honda Civic for 15 years. She lived in a modest 2-bedroom house that she purchased in the 90s. When I asked her once why she did not treat herself to something nice, she just smiled and said she was saving for something important. I assumed she meant retirement, or maybe she wanted to help me someday. I never imagined she was building a fortune quietly, carefully, without anyone knowing the extent of it. Mom and I were close. After Dad died, it was just the 2 of us against the world. She taught me how to balance a checkbook, how to treat people with respect regardless of their station in life, and how to spot someone's character by watching what they do when nobody is looking. I wish I had paid better attention to that last lesson. I met Lauren 7 years ago at a coffee shop in downtown Portland. She was sitting alone with a laptop working on some marketing campaign for a tech startup. She had this energy about her, sharp and ambitious, the kind of person who knew what she wanted and went after it. We started talking, and within 2 months we were dating. 2 years later, we got married at a small ceremony overlooking the Columbia River. Those first few years were good. Lauren seemed to love me for who I was. We lived in a small rented apartment, splitting bills, cooking dinner together on weeknights, talking about our dreams. She was building her career, and I was steady at my accounting job. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. But about 3 years into the marriage, things started to shift. Lauren began asking more questions about my mom's business. She would mention how my mother owned 3 laundromats, how that must bring in decent money. She suggested I get more involved, maybe help manage the books or take over operations eventually. When I told her Mom liked running things herself and did not need my help, Lauren seemed annoyed. She started making comments about our living situation, how we were still renting while my mother owned property. She compared us to her friends who had bought houses, new cars, took trips to Europe. Lauren would apologize, say she was just frustrated with our financial situation, that she wanted us to have more. I believed her. I loved her. I thought it was normal for couples to have tension about money. Then came the meeting at Mr. Harrison's office. It was a gray morning rain, tapping against the windows of the law firm on the 10th floor of a building in southwest Portland. Lauren came with me, which I appreciated at the time. I thought I needed her support. Mr. Harrison was an older gentleman, maybe in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. He had known my mother for over 20 years. Also present was my mother's accountant, a quiet woman named Mrs. Shepard, who had managed Mom's finances for the past decade. Mr. Harrison opened a leather folder and began reading the will. I was not prepared for what came next. I literally felt the air leave my lungs. $2,300,000. The 3 laundromats were worth approximately $1,200,000. The rest was in savings accounts, stocks, bonds, and a small commercial property she had purchased 5 years earlier and rented out. All of it was left to me, her only child. I sat there frozen, unable to process that my modest, frugal mother had quietly amassed this kind of wealth. Next to me, Lauren's breathing quickened. I glanced over and saw her staring at the papers, eyes wide, hands gripping the armrests of her chair. Mr. Harrison continued reading, mentioning something about special provisions, but I was too overwhelmed to focus. All I could think about was my mother working those long hours, saving every dollar, never spending on herself. She had done this for me. After the meeting, Lauren was unusually cheerful. In the car, she started talking about our future. We could finally buy a house, she said. A real house with a yard. We could get new cars. Maybe take that trip to Italy we had always talked about. I told her I wanted to keep the laundromats running, that it felt important to honor what Mom had built. Lauren agreed immediately, almost too enthusiastically. She said of course we should keep them, they were profitable, it made sense. But something in her voice felt off. That night she cooked my favorite meal, pasta with homemade marinara sauce. She was attentive, affectionate, laughing at my jokes. It had been months since she had acted this way, and while part of me was relieved, another part felt uneasy. I could not name why. I could not sleep that night. Around midnight, I heard Lauren in the living room talking on the phone. Her voice was low, careful. I got out of bed quietly and stood in the hallway. I could only catch fragments. She said something about over 2 million, then something about waiting a bit. My heart started pounding. Who was she talking to at midnight, I told myself. I was being paranoid that grief was making me suspicious. I went back to bed, but sleep never came. 2 weeks after the will reading, I met with Mr. Harrison again to begin transferring assets. The process was complicated, involving multiple accounts and titles. During one of these meetings, he brought up the special provisions my mother had included. I had forgotten about that part. Mr. Harrison explained that my mother had established an irrevocable trust 3 years prior. All of her assets had been placed into this trust, and I was named as the sole beneficiary. The trust had specific language protecting the assets from various claims, including divorce. When he said that word divorce, I felt cold. I asked him why my mother would be concerned about divorce. Mr. Harrison looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly that my mother was a very observant woman. He did not elaborate, but I understood. My mother had seen something in Lauren, something I had either missed or refused to acknowledge. She had built this protection not out of paranoia, but out of love. I drove home in a daze. Oregon is a community property state, which means assets acquired during marriage are typically split 50-50 in a divorce. But inherited assets placed in a trust before or kept separate from marital funds are protected. My mother had known exactly what she was doing. She had known somehow that I might need this shield. When I got home, I said nothing to Lauren about the trust, but I started watching her more carefully. Over the next few days, her behavior became impossible to ignore. She pushed me to sell the laundromats, claiming we could invest the money in something more profitable. She suggested I quit my job, that we had enough money now to live comfortably without me working. When I resisted, she grew irritated. Then came the shopping. Lauren started buying expensive clothes, designer handbags, jewelry. When I asked about it, she smiled and said, "It was our money now." Was it not? That phrase, "our money," made my stomach turn. She also started spending more time on her phone, texting someone constantly. One evening, I saw a message notification flash across her screen before she could grab it. The message was from someone named Kyle, and it said, "Soon, babe. Just need him to sign a few things first." I felt like I had been punched. Kyle was a guy Lauren used to work with at her old marketing job. She had mentioned him in passing before, but never in a way that raised alarms. Now, seeing that message, I knew there was someone else. I knew this had been planned, but I needed proof. I needed to be sure before I did anything. So, I set a trap. I told Lauren casually that Mr. Harrison had mentioned we might need to update some legal documents, maybe sign some papers to finalize the estate. Her reaction was immediate. She wanted to know what kind of documents, whether she needed to sign anything, how soon we could take care of it. I said I was not sure that I would ask the attorney. She became anxious, almost pushy. telling me to handle it quickly. Then came the afternoon that shattered everything. I left work early, claiming I felt sick. I drove home and parked down the street, then walked up to our apartment quietly. I could hear Lauren's voice from the bedroom. She was on the phone and she was not being careful. I stood outside the door and listened. She was talking to Kyle. She said, "I am telling you this is it. Over 2 million. Kyle's voice came through the speakerphone. "And you are sure he does not know about us?" Lauren laughed. "He is clueless. He has been clueless for 2 years." 2 years. I gripped the doorframe to keep from collapsing. They had been together for 2 years. 2 entire years while I worked, came home, kissed her goodnight, believed we had a future. Lauren continued, "I already talked to my lawyer. Oregon is a no-fault state. I file, we wait. I get half of everything he inherited." Kyle asked about the trust she had mentioned earlier. Lauren's tone shifted, becoming conspiratorial. "My lawyer said, as long as he mingles the assets, like putting them in joint accounts or buying property together, it becomes marital property. I have been pushing him to do exactly that." I felt bile rise in my throat. She was not just leaving me. She was manipulating me, trying to get me to make legal mistakes so she could take the money. Kyle laughed on the other end. "Once you get the money, we can finally be together. No more sneaking around." Lauren's voice went soft. "I cannot wait."